So as I said, we're going to go over first aid requirements in the workplace. So the purpose here will be to we'll talk about the regulation. We'll talk about first aid training with that Josh will actually go through for us. We'll talk about blended first aid training as well, which is one of the things that HeartZap offers to all their clients. And we'll talk about first aid kits as well. So let's start with the regulation. So regulation 1101 is the regulation for first aid requirements for the workplace. There has been talk lately that the Ministry of Labor is reviewing the first aid regulations for the workplaces. And there's not been any updates on that. So at this point in time, regulation 1101 is your guideline with regards to first aid for your workplace. The first point is that a first aid station must be in charge of a worker who works in the immediate vicinity of the first aid station and who is qualified in first aid to the standards required by the regulation. First aid stations shall be located as to be easily accessible for the prompt treatment of any workers at all times when work is in progress, and a first aid kit shall contain as a minimum the first aid items required by the regulation, and all items in the kit shall be maintained in good condition. Every employer shall keep a record of all circumstances respecting an accident as described by the injured worker, the date and time of its occurrence, and the name and witnesses and nature of exact location of the injuries to the worker, and the date, time, and nature of each first aid treatment given. Employers shall also inspect first aid kits and their contents at not less than yearly intervals, and shall mark the inspection card for each box with the date of the most recent inspection and the signature of the person making the inspection. So depending on the size of your workplace, there are different requirements in regards to first aid. So the first level at this point is 1 to 5 employees. So every employer that has 1 to 5 employees on any one shift must make sure that there's a first aid station at all times in charge of a worker who is the valid holder of a valid St. John's emergency first aid certificate or its equivalent, and also works in the immediate vicinity of the station. If you have between 6 and 15 employees, every employer employing more than 5 workers and not more than 15 workers in any one shift must have a first aid kit, and they must have a first aid station that is in charge of a worker who's the holder of a valid St. John's Ambulance Standard first aid certificate or its equivalent.
We're in a very, very complex time right now. I'm not going to dwell on.
Sorry about that. For workplaces that have between 16 and 199 employees, every employer employing more than 15 and fewer than 200 workers must have a first aid kit, a stretcher, and 2 blankets on hand. The employer shall ensure the first aid station at all times is in charge of a worker who is the holder of a valid St. John Ambulance Standard first aid certificate or its equivalent and works in the immediate vicinity of that station. If a workplace has 200 or more employees in any one shift at a place of employment shall provide and maintain a first aid room that is equipped with first aid supplies as per the regulation. The employer shall ensure that the first aid room is in the charge of a registered nurse, or the worker's standard first aid certificate must be prominently displayed in the first aid room. Where the first aid station referred to in section 9 or 10 or the first aid room referred to in section 11 is not easily accessible, in order to provide prompt treatment, an additional first aid station or stations shall be established to comply with subsection 1(3). So now let's talk about a few specific situations. For transportation, construction, farm, and bush sites, for the purposes of section 8, 9, 10, and 11, a railway, train, vessel, or bus on a route other than an urban or suburban route on which a worker is employed, the central point from which bush workers are dispatched daily to work sites, a vehicle being used by an employer to transport workers, or the site of a construction, repair, or demolition of a building shall be deemed to be place of employment. Where the place of employment is the site of a construction, repair, or demolition of a building, a first aid station shall be maintained in the time office for the project. Where there is no time office for the project, a first aid station shall be maintained in a vehicle or building at the site, and Section 1 applies. Where construction, repair, or demolition of a building is in charge of a general contractor, the general contractor shall provide and maintain the first aid station or stations required by the regulation in respect of the workers in the same manner as if the general contractor were the employer of the workers. Every employer of bush workers or farm workers, or both, shall provide at a central location a first aid box that contains a current edition of the standard St. John's Ambulance First Aid Manual, 1 card of safety pins, dressings that consist of 16 adhesive dressings individually wrapped, 6 sterile gauze pads 3 inches square, 4 rolls of 3-inch gauze bandage, 2 sterile surgical pads suitable for pressure dressings individually wrapped, and 4 triangular bandages. Every employer using a vehicle to transport workers shall equip the vehicle with a first aid box containing a current edition of the standard St. John First Aid Manual, 1 card of safety pins, dressings that consist of 16 adhesive dressings individually wrapped, 6 sterile gauze pads 3-inch square, 4 rolls of 3-inch gauze bandages, 2 surgical pads suitable for pressure dressings individually wrapped, and 4 triangular bandages. The employer of workers that are engaged in transporting goods outside an urban area in a vehicle shall equip the vehicle with the first aid kit containing a current edition of the standard St. John's Manual, dressings that consist of 12 adhesive dressings individually wrapped, 1 4-inch bandage compress, 2 2-inch bandage compresses, and 1 triangular bandage. Where a worker is operating heavy construction and maintenance equipment in a place where a first aid station is not readily available to him or her, in the event of an accident, the employer shall equip the machinery with the first aid kit containing the items required by subsection 3. A bus operated on a route other than an urban route shall be equipped with a first aid kit containing the items required by subsection 3. And the motive power units of all railways other than units used in yard service shall be equipped with a first aid box equipped with the items required by subsection 2. If you haven't muted your microphone, could you please mute it? We're getting a lot of feedback here. Thank you. So let's talk about some of the approved first aid providers. So HeartZap Services, which is a division of HeartZap Safety Training and Equipment, is an approved equivalent for first aid training. They also offer emergency first aid and standard first aid, both traditional in class, as well as a blended option for emergency and standard first aid. And at this point, I'm going to cede the floor to Josh.
Okay, if you can go to the next slide. I apologize, everyone that was looking forward for Ray. You're stuck with me today. So as Doug was saying, we do offer equivalent to St. John's Ambulance. We are an approved provider for your emergency first aid, standard first aid, and also BLS. I don't know if we have any people, the healthcare workers here. So just go over a bit of it. We do offer it in emergency first aid and standard first aid in a traditional class. So the emergency first aid traditional, it's usually instructor time. It's 6.5 hours of teaching. People that should take this, it's actually should be, as Doug said, 1 to 5 employees per shift. Now you only need to have 1, but we recommend that you actually do with about at least 10% of your employees, because certain things, as if that one person is the one that needs to have the first aid, you're in trouble, because who's going to provide the services on them as well. So it's always good to have multiple people in case the person that needs the emergency first aid, the first aid attending to, is the person that is certified. But you also have to account for things like vacation, sick time. If they have to leave the office for emergencies, you always have to have someone on site there for it. So that person leaves, now you're not compliant with the ministry standards. So that would be why we recommend you have a bit more than just that one employee. Next slide, Doug, please. So what's provided in the traditional class is your course modules. So we would cover emergency medical services, roles and responsibilities, emergency scene management, choking emergencies, cardiovascular emergencies, respiratory system and breathing emergencies. You also get the heart saver CPR adult, and then we also have the option of the child and infant as well for you. And then you would actually get to use a AED device, and we also cover minor, major wounds. This certificate's good for 3 years. There is no renewal on a emergency first aid, though. Next slide, please. And then there's your standard traditional in-class first aid. This is 13 hours of teaching. People that should take this, as Doug said, anyone that has 5 or more employees per shift will be required to take the standard first aid option. And again, we recommend that at least you train at least 10% of your employees. One is standard, but for those circumstances, vacation, all that, you always want to make sure that you're ministry compliant, or you're also doing the best due diligence for your employees and the safety of their needs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in here, it's going to be similar courses as you do in the emergency. However, though, we go further in depth. So you definitely get some bone and joint injuries, secondary survey, multi-casual preventative. We go into head, spine, and pelvic injuries, poisons, sudden medical emergencies, environmental. So this is a 2-day course for the traditional in-class. Certificate's good for 3 years. There is the option within the 3 years to actually do renewal for the certificate. So that would actually just be it wouldn't be as long in the class. It'd be less of the time frame in there. I think it's a 1-day class. If we can go to the next slide, this would be the refresher course that we'd be talking about. So it's only 6.5 hours. People that would take this would be employees that currently have a standard first aid certificate that is valid. So it has to be taken before it expires. And it would have to be first time taking the refresher course. So if you've already taken a refresher course, you can't take another refresher. You have to take the full course again. We would just go over new techniques in that. So then in the refresher course, traditional class, it's similar. You go over all the same thing. It's just you don't go as much in depth in the theory portion, but you're doing all the practical portion, and you're refreshing and showing that you can actually just a reminder of how you do the actual, the performing of the actual tasks in that, and the CPR and the first aid. We technically recommend that people do the full courses, because after 3 years, you tend to forget some things with it, or if there is any changes that have actually happened in the ministry updates, then we would actually provide you that there. But a lot of people feel more comfortable. It's like speaking a language, doing certain activities. Like you always want to get refreshers there to actually do your skills, and that you're actually comfortable with them. The next. So then we also do offer these programs as a blended option. So what it is, it's an online training program that successfully combines online multimedia instruction with instructor-led sessions, which offer an effective training and method for emergency first aid, standard first aid, and CPR certification. Blended learning combines online learning with an in-person skill session, which includes practice and assessment. So if we can go to the next slide, it just goes in. So some of the reasons why you would do blended training is you can actually do it at your own pace. So you're doing the interactive online before you actually come into the in-class. So it's instructor-led. People can do at their time they want to do it. So it's less time that you're away from the office, and that you're only on site or doing the actual physical portion for 1 day, and it's a half day there. Also, there's some new evidence provided by the International Liaison Committee on Resuscitation that specific formats such as self-instruction or computer-based modules can provide similar outcomes to an only instructor-led course. So the advantages, as we said, you maximize your retention to the material through self-paced multimedia. So some people, they may only learn for an hour span at a time, so they can do one module for this hour, go go do something else, come back and do another one. So they're not just overloading their brains at one time. And they can also review. So if it takes them a bit longer to do a module, they can extend the time of the module there. So it's self-paced, self-timing. You just have to do it before you actually come in and do the practical portion. Also, because it's online available, you can do it anywhere, anytime. So if you have remote workers or you're not all in the same place, you can do that beforehand. So you're only bringing everyone in at one time for less time. So especially with people working from home, this is a great time that you have everyone can do the online portion while they're at home and then bring them in for a smaller session. So it's less time everyone's gathered in at one time. You also reduce first aid and training costs because streamlined courses means less time off the job. And then you're ensured standardized first aid, CPR certification, recertification courses as well. And then, as I said, it accommodates everyone's learning style because some people are visual learners, some people are audio, some like to read. So it balances and you have the options to play with the way you want to learn because it provides all platforms there for that. Go to the next slide. So there's a 3-step process for it. If we go to the next slide and go into the first step, it's the actual online blended session. So you would sign up. We would give each individual a unique username and password for the online link. They would go on, they would do a variety of different learning elements and video lessons, which is narration and special features. So it's interactive with the experience as well. So there's some drag and drop exercises, there's question and answers, and then there's also lesson reviews. So you would do all those and then you would do a little quiz with the information to make sure you retained it. But there's different step-by-steps as you go through to actually make sure that you retain the information you have. Okay. Then we would get you to an in-person skill session. That's typically about 4 to 5 hours. It's led by a certified instructor. And this is where you actually do your scenarios and you actually show your practical performance of the CPR and first aid skills to make sure that you're doing it properly. But the advantage of this is because we've already done the theory, we can focus the situations to actually have a situation geared around your place of employment. So if you're a roofer, we would focus a bit more on potential injuries or first aid scenarios that you would see there. If you are you work in retail, we could look at different retails, slips, falls, and trips, and that would be more your things that we would somewhat look at to give you examples. So we would look at basically what your different careers are, and we can tailor the actual scenarios to something that you would actually see on every day. So you actually get a bit more realistic and stuff that you would actually potentially be using. So you would actually be a bit more prepared for if you ever did have to use your skills. Okay, and that's all I have. We'll look at the questions afterwards and I'll answer them after Doug wants to keep going here with the first aid.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Definitely a lot of information to take in. So at this point, WSIB and CSA standards have been developing standards in regards to first aid. And up to the beginning of last year, the WSIB standards were the specific requirements for first aid kits for the workplace. However, on January 1st, 2020, the WSIB accepted the CSA Z 1220/17 for first aid kit requirements to actually put that into place. So section 5.3 of the standard is your type 1 personal first aid kits. And these are kits to all workers who work in isolation or those who do not otherwise have access to a workplace first aid kit. 5.4 is your basic first aid kit. It's suitable for most workplaces with a low risk work environment. There are specific annexes in the CSA standard. The minimum content requirements for each of the 3 sizes of type 2. There's a small kit that is for between 2 to 25 workers per shift, a medium kit between 26 and 50 workers, and a large kit for 51 to 100 workers per shift. 5.5 is the intermediate first aid kits. So these are suitable for workplaces with higher risk level work environments. A type 3 kit contains all of the items in a type 2 kit in accordance with clause 5.4, plus additional items to meet the needs of workplaces with an increased risk of first aid events in a higher risk environment. And again, this is the same idea with small kits being for between 2 to 25 workers per shift, medium kits for 26 to 50 workers per shift, and your larger kits for 51 to 100 workers per shift. So we have a chart here if we go through. So if you have your type 1 first aid kit classification, you're required to have one for an employee who works in isolation, but it's not applicable in situations with more than one employee. Your type 2, your basic, is you're required to have one small one for a small kit. You're required for 2 small or 1 medium for 25 to 50 workers. And you're required to have 4 small or 2 medium or 2 small and 1 medium or 1 large if you have 50 to 100 workers. And finally, your type 3 intermediate, for 2 to 25 workers, you're required to have 1 small first aid kit. 25 to 50, it's 2 small or 1 medium. And for 51 to 100 workers, it's 4 small, 2 medium, or 2 small and 1 medium, or 1 large. So other considerations that you need to take into account when selecting your first aid kits include the level of risk for the specific workplace environment. If you're in an office environment where there's very little machinery or anything like that, and you have a smaller workforce, you may want to consider a smaller first aid kit. However, if you are in an environment where there's significantly more hazards, such as the use of machines, use of equipment, like knives, things like that, then you want to consider having a larger first aid kit than what's the minimum requirement of the standard. You also want to consider the layout of the workplace, whether you have multi-level workplaces or high rises. In situations where you have multi-level workplaces, I recommend myself that you have 1 first aid kit on each floor. That way people don't have to try to go down to a lower floor or upper floor to try and get the first aid kit in an emergency. The distance from the emergency medical services or the response time for emergency medical services can also be considered. The longer it could potentially take, the more thorough your first aid kit you're going to want to have in this situation. This is because you want to have more available to you in case there is a delay in emergency services getting to your facility. Workplaces with a small number of employees dispersed over a wide area could have different first aid requirements in different areas. So this could be something like a larger warehouse that would require having first aid kits spread out throughout the facility in order to make sure that there's quick and easy access to each of these. And then finally, workers in a remote or isolated area could require additional first aid equipment and supplies. So workers that are working remotely certainly have significantly more hazards and concerns to be worried about due to the fact that there isn't others around or there's a small group. You will need to take into consideration what kind of first aid kit you'll want to provide to those workers. Workplace first aid kits need to be regularly inspected at periodic intervals to ensure the completeness and usability of all items at a time. The minimum inspection requirements should be no more than 90 days, or if there has been an incident where first aid is required and the first aid kit has had to be used, an inspection is required to ensure that you still have sufficient supplies to comply with the regulation and to be able to assist anybody who's injured in the workplace. The first aid station must contain the first aid box containing the items required by Regulation 1101. There should also be a notice board displaying the board's poster known as Form 82. So this is your in case of injury at work poster. These can be sourced through WSIB, but they are also available online and you can print them out as well. Valid first aid certificates or qualification for the trained workers that are on duty. So if you have first aid trained staff, you need to have their certificates posted at your first aid station. An inspection card with spaces for recording the date of the most recent inspection of the first aid box and the signature of the person making the inspection. So due to the current COVID-19 situation, there are extensions that are in place with regards to first aid training. And I think Josh could probably give a little bit more info to finish off here. But basically, anybody whose certification has expired as of March 1st has until the end of this year to renew their training. This is where blended training programs can really come in handy, because you can still get your certification done in the meantime. And once things are opened up, you'll be able to send your people to get their practical sessions in place. So I'll leave this with Josh just to make a quick comment here.
Yeah, so Liz, you're inquiring about that. So it is correct. They have extended it to the end of the year, December 31st. What we recommend though is we also have an option because, yeah, it has been extended there. However, though, once we do open up and get into training, it's going to get very hectic because everyone's going to need it at the same time. So what we do offer at HeartSap is we offer the blended option. So you can actually get set up and started with the actual theory portion, complete all the theory portion at this time, if especially if people aren't remote areas and you're not comfortable gathering, and we would give you a temporary certificate to go to the actual end of the year. And then once things are established and you feel comfortable coming back into a classroom or having our instructor come in, they would come in and do the practical portion at that time. So it would be valid till December 31st. It would ensure that you get your renewal or you get your have your basic training, because if you have any new employees that start that need it, then they would have to have a certificate. If they don't have anything at all, then they definitely need to have a certificate for that. So it would give them a temporary one for there, and it would also put you at the front of the line. So when you do need to get your training and do the practical, we would have you already booked there and have you set up for ahead of the line. So it's just advantage. So we would take advantage of having the skills, because even people at home, working at home, if you think about it as well, they have their families as well around or different things, and there's more time at home. So just because they're not at the workplace doesn't mean that they might not have to use their skills, because more people are at home in the communities. They might actually be as a good faith for the communities and stuff like that. As your business, you can say, oh well, yeah, we'll help us support our employees. They have the basic knowledge of what's going on, and they might have to use it there, and that you're prepared as well for them to be in emergency situations as well at home.
Okay, great, thank you. So we just wanted to finish off here with some contact info. You can contact myself if you have any health and safety related questions for your workplace. And HeartSap safety training and equipment, we've provided Ray's contact info here. You can also contact Josh or Dale or any of the sales reps for HeartSap, and they'd be more than happy to work with you to find a solution that works for your business in regards to first aid. They also do working at heights training, joint health and safety committee training as well for certified members. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. And as we all know, we all need first aid at one point or another. So we definitely look forward to hearing from all of you at some point in time, hopefully to help you guys with your first aid or any other health and safety training or consulting services. So I'm just going to stop the share here.
And my contact email and phone number is in the chat for anyone that does require it. To reach out at any time.
So the first question that was asked, so let's go through some of the questions here. So the first question that was asked, will the slide deck be available after the presentation? Yes. Yes, it can. It will be available and will be sent out, as well as a post-webinar feedback form. We just what we're hoping to accomplish with that is just to determine if there's any topics you guys would like to hear that we can present on. And then there's a question here, with COVID, our province is in lockdown until at least May 20th. How would one refresh certificates for employees who expire by the end of the year? Is there an online version? So I believe Josh actually just answered this about 2 minutes ago, but yes, there are some extensions up until the end of the year, but you can also book the blended portion of the training where you can do your theory. And as Josh said, there are arrangements that can be made further down once things open up and you're more comfortable having people in to your workplace or sending people to the training facility. I am also aware that the training facility in Cambridge, they do a very good job in regards to physical distancing and sanitizing and the use of masks and taking their COVID measures seriously. So you can be rest assured that you'll be very safe if you do decide to complete the training at this point.
Just to further speak on that, so right now the regulations are that we can have 9 participants with 1 instructor, so we're allowed to have up to 10. If that changes, we'll let people know. But our slots are separated, and all PPP is being used, and you are having to use your own materials and training books. And we do offer it for individuals at our Cambridge office and in North Bay. However, though, we do corporate group sessions that we can go to your facility, but we will require at least a minimum of 6 employees for that. And we would have to, at this time, still abide by the training ministry guidelines of the maximum 9 participants.
There's a question about 2 parts. So the 2 parts of the training can be done at different times, like one in June and the other when we reopen. So once we complete the online portion, and then in the in-house portion, just the expiry date go from 3 years from December 2021. So the new expiry would be December 2024 in that instance. So would that be the case, or would it be from when they first
Yeah,
complete
so
the
I
theory
provided
portion?
it in the chat there, but for those that didn't see it, if you do the online portion now, we can give you a temporary certificate till we do the actual in class. So that'd be valid till the end of the year. If they extend it farther, then we would extend the validation of that temporary. But it's from the moment you do the in class practical, you'll get your full certification, and it'll be from that date there for 3 years. It will be good for. So technically, it's a wise thing to do. If you do it right now, we could end up providing you with a certificate that lasts a little bit longer than 3 years. So you're getting your best value at this time right now if you do it that way, and also reassuring that your employees are safe at home and wherever they are. But you're also, when you come back to the workplace, you're only going to be missing about half days of work to do the actual in-class training, whereas people are at home remote, that you're not, once you're back working full running, I'm assuming most businesses want to get their operations fully operating and running without as much training and other stuff going on there. So we're trying to work and help with you guys as best as possible, and we can definitely, if there's a unique situation, you need something different, you can definitely reach out to us, and we can actually work with each individual circumstances if there is other factors there.
Okay, great. So there's no other questions that are in the chat. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask before we wrap up here? If you'd like, you can unmute yourself to ask the question. Okay. All right. Well, I want to take this opportunity again to thank everybody for attending. I hope that you were able to gain some valuable information with regards to first aid for the workplace. We will be running our next webinar probably between the 3rd or 4th week of April. We should have a date out pretty soon, and we will definitely be in touch with everyone to let them know when the next one is, as well as the topic. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and I hope you guys all stay safe. And if you have any health and safety related questions, whether it's training or consulting, please feel free to reach out to either of us, and we'd be more than happy to assist you. Okay, take care.